friends, welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to talk to you about this book, Whisper Down the Lane by Clay McLeod Chapman. You guys know that this is one of my most anticipated reads of 2021, and I of course got it on release day, and I just finished it the other day, so I wanted to give you my full thoughts on this book and whether or not it lives up to what I expected it to be. So starting out with a little bit of a synopsis, so we have a dual timeline here. So the first timeline happens in 2013 and it follows a man named Richard who's just gotten married to Tamara, and Tamara has a little boy named Elijah. And Richard has a job as a local school teacher, and he teaches at the same school as Tamara as well. And one day their school mascot, who is a rabbit, is found ritualistically murdered on the front lawn of the school, and wound in amongst the guts of the rabbit is a birthday card for Richard. And we learn that Richard doesn't have a birthday coming up, but a little boy named Sean does. So then the other timeline that we have takes place in 1982 and 83 and follows a young boy named Sean who basically tells what he thinks is a little lie about one of his teachers to his mom, and it sets off a complete panic and rumors and accusations, and the whole situation gets blown up into this huge thing. So there are serious accusations made, lives are ruined, and Sean and his mom are kind of at the center of all of this. And of course, because it takes place in the 80s, it is wrapped up into the satanic panic of that period. So that's the central theme of this book. And then I'll just read you the little last section of the inner flap here. And it says, "Now 30 years later, someone is here to remind Richard that they remember what Sean did. And although Sean doesn't exist anymore, someone has to pay the price for his lies." So like I said, the central theme of the books kind of revolves around the satanic panic of the 1980s, which is something that I've always been really interested in. I grew up during that era, and I remember back when, like Black Sabbath and, heavy metal music, Dungeons and Dragons, and all of that kind of stuff. It was all evil and it all had to do with Satan, and they're gonna take your children away. So I remember that really vividly, and it's just been one of my interests ever since. I've always been really fascinated by that period and kind of everything that came out of accusations that were not founded at all in evidence. So first of all, let's get into what I thought about the writing style and the character development of the book. So overall, I really enjoyed how this book was written. The story flowed really well. I couldn't find any continuity errors, which is something that kind of really takes me out of the story. If something doesn't really make sense, or there's parts of the story that don't really have to do with the central theme and it doesn't really lead anywhere, it's just thrown in for whatever reason, that can really take me out of a book. So I didn't find anything like that. Like I said, the main theme of this book was the satanic panic of the 1980s, and it definitely stayed on that topic. And this book in certain chapters also had transcriptions of what would have been on a recorded interview, like a police interview or a counselor interview. And so the young boy Sean in the 1982 to 83 period was getting interviewed, and we had the transcripts of those interviews. And I have to say that I wasn't expecting to be as infuriated as I was reading this, and that's because you could really see, and this is like a central kind of topic of this whole thing, that the children were always given really leading questions, and their story would kind of flow to the way that the interviewer wanted it to. So whether it was a police officer or a psychiatrist or whatever the situation was, you could really see that through these transcriptions. And like I said, I found myself getting emotional, and I found myself getting angry at how this kind of set out, and that absolutely happened during this period. So I really liked that was incorporated into here. So like I mentioned before, the story is written in a dual timeline. So we have the situation that's taking place in the 80s during the actual satanic panic, and then we have a situation with an older man that's taking place in 2013. And when I read dual timeline stories, sometimes things can get a little bit confusing. And I also find that I'm always more interested in one storyline rather than the other one, and sometimes it comes through in the author's writing as well, that one part of the storyline is very, very well developed. The characters are great and it's a compelling story, and then the other timeline is kind of like bare bones. And I've found that in the past year or so that I've been reading, and yeah, so I usually lean to one section or the other, but I found in this book, number one, it was laid out really well. The chapters were all labeled properly, so you knew exactly which timeline you were reading from. And when I was reading one timeline, I found that I couldn't wait to get back to the other one. And then when I was reading that one, I couldn't wait to get back to the other one. And the way that the chapters always finished off, it always finished in like an oh shit kind of moment, and then went to the other timeline. So it really enthralled the reader, and you really sunk into this story. And I found that it had lots of kind of mystery, and there was this kind of paranormal element to it, and you were wondering what was going on with that. And it was like my brain was constantly asking these questions and I couldn't really see which way this was going. And I found that that dual timeline was done super, super well, which I have to applaud the author. Normally, like I said, they can get a little bit confusing, or that one is developed more than the other, and I didn't find that in here at all. I really enjoyed both timelines. The other thing that I found that was done really well here was, like I said, the author stuck to the topic. There wasn't any like extraneous information that didn't really make sense, or it wasn't tied to anything. It was just kind of thrown in there just because they wanted it in there. There were little tidbits of information all throughout both timelines that just, they intertwined so well. And there was not, like I said, there was nothing in here that was put in for absolutely no reason. And also, besides that, I always have a little bit of trouble with authors who start a story and they don't really have a set outline, and they say, oh well, I just want the story to take me wherever it's going. And things can kind of get meandering and they can go off topic, and there's long periods of time between the actual story. This was not the case with this. It had a set outline. I know that the author knew what he wanted to say. He wanted to talk about the Satanic Panic. He wanted to talk about Sean's story, and it stayed on track with that. So overall, the story flowed really well. And then on top of that, with the characters, every single character in this book was well developed. There was no one in there who was just in there for no reason, or all of a sudden they're a main character when at the beginning of the book they weren't. There was none of that. Every single character is well developed. I felt for every single character, and I just had a real picture in my mind of what was going on here. I was fully enthralled by the story. I was right there when everything was happening with Sean in the 80s, and I was there with Tamara and Richard and their marriage and what was going on with that. And I really had a particular attachment to Tamara, and that will come up a little bit later in something else that I wanted to talk about. But the character development was just fantastic in this book. I mean, whether it was an adult or a child or one of the counselors or whatever, you had a full picture of every single person that was involved in this story. So with all of that, with the story, with the characters, with the themes, everything how it was laid out, I honestly couldn't find anything that I would change about this book. I really, really enjoyed it from cover to cover. And then this doesn't have anything to do with the story, but at the back of the book, it actually has something called a reading group guide. And it has basically questions for, if you wanted to develop like a reading circle around this book. So, it has questions of what you would ask yourself, or how does this theme tie in with this? So I don't want to go into it too much because I don't want to give away any of the plot here, but I really enjoyed that. So there's 10 questions at the back of the book that even someone like me who's just finished it, I can go through these lists and ask myself all of the questions. So for my overall thoughts on the book, this is a book that is extremely emotional. Like I said, it is infuriating at times, and I felt completely drawn in. And it really makes you think. It makes you think about, how a rumor or a lie or a small question can kind of get blown up into this huge thing, of course, which is the entire situation that happened with the Satanic Panic back in the 80s. And that is actually something that we are going through right now, again in 2021, with conspiracy theories and alternative facts and all of that sort of thing. And there was a chapter at the beginning of the book that takes place in the 2013 timeline when the teachers are sitting in a circle, basically at a staff meeting, and they're talking about quite a famous event that happened in the US back in 2012. And you know, there's kind of a bit of banter between two teachers where one teacher is saying, well, you know, I keep hearing these things, and maybe this thing that they're saying happened didn't really happen, and maybe it was made up, and maybe it was the government, or whatever the case was. And then of course you have the other teacher. In this case it was Richard's wife who was engaging in this argument, and she was like, no, this thing happened. That's a fact. It happened. And she was getting very, very worked up. And it's funny because when I was reading that chapter, I was like, oh my God, it's me. And I really attached to this character of Tamara because she is one of these women who is just a no-nonsense, and she is very passionate about things that she believes in. And, you know, she's a vegetarian. She believes in facts of things that happen. She believes in science. She believes in the whole thing. And so I really grasped onto that character. And I think that passage was put in there because, yeah, we are going through the same sort of things right now. And these sorts of rumors and lies and alternative facts can get blown way out of proportion. People get hurt. You know, it's causing a huge division in our society. And, you know, so you can really see the parallels of everything that was happening back then in the 80s and things that are happening now. And that really, really stuck out to me. So I just want to add on to that as well, that don't expect this book to be about a satanic cult. It's not that at all. So this has to do with the actual Satanic Panic, which in that case, there were no cults. There were no Satanists. There were no dead children. There was no evidence for any of that. So I just wanted to throw in there that don't expect this book to have to do with cults. It has to do with the Satanic Panic of the 80s. And if you know anything about that, then you know how that kind of all came together. So the other element that I really enjoyed in this story was there was kind of like this paranormal sort of mystery that was going on, that was intertwined into the 2013 timeline, and it was really fluid. You weren't really sure what was going on. Was there someone else that was doing this? Was our main character kind of descending into madness and he wasn't really sure what was going on? Was it actually paranormal what was going on? It was just a great mystery, and it just kept building and building and building until the very end, and it all culminated really, really well into something that was very satisfying when kind of everything really wrapped up. And I love those sort of storylines that it's like, am I losing my mind or is something else going on? And of course Richard has this whole thing that happened to him in the past, that he's like, you know, am I losing time here? Am I blacking out and doing things that I don't realize that I'm doing? And that whole thing I thought was done really well, and it kept me completely enthralled into the whole thing. So for this book, between staying on topic, which is a topic that I'm very interested in, like I said, with the Satanic Panic and how all of that kind of developed, and how the kids were kind of looped into saying these things, and then you had the great story development, the dual timelines were done fantastically, and then we have the element, which I'm really glad made it in here, that things are happening now in 2021 that are very reminiscent of things that happened back then, and we have to make sure that we're following evidence and science and facts, and that element and how it was brought in there, and the bantering between these two teachers when they're talking about a really horrific situation that had happened and what's real and what's fake. You know, there were so many layers in this book, and I found even when I was writing down my notes on what I was going to talk about with this opinion, it's just so vast, and it was built really well. The story was compelling. It really makes you think, and I think a lot of people that read this book that don't know a whole lot about the Satanic Panic in the 80s will go and try to research it so they can find out a little bit more. And you know, so I can't find a single thing I would have changed with this book. I'm giving it a full 5 stars, and right now this has knocked everything out of the park so far that I've read in 2021. I think the last book that I read that I enjoyed this much was probably My Dark Vanessa, which I actually read this time last year, and it's just fabulous. Please go out and buy this book. I can almost guarantee that you're going to enjoy it. It's a compelling story, even if you're not really into the whole Satanic Panic thing or true crime or anything like that. It was fabulous. It was really, really well done. And bravo to the author for getting all of this information and the themes and everything squeezed into a 300-page book. I really had trouble putting this one down. I recommend everybody read it. So there you guys go. That is my full review of Whisper Down the Lane by Clay McLeod Chapman. Please, if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. It really helps out the channel, and of course, you guys know I love chatting with you. But until next time, everybody, stay spooky. Bye.